Hi guys, welcome to another edition of Game On. This is actually kind of an overdue edition from me. Since the last tag team episode that Justin and I did a few weeks ago, he's really been kind of pulling the weight on the channel, doing a lot of solo vids since then. It's my turn, and I wanted to get one more out before the end of the year as the holidays here approach. And this is one that I've been thinking about for a long time. I had put it off because I wanted to try and relate it to some current gaming systems. I wanted to have enough examples that I could sort of illustrate. But with the recent release of Cyberpunk Red, that sort of filled in the last system that I wanted to deal with, so I figured now's the time. As you can probably tell by the header, what I'm talking about here are the philosophies of developing characters according to physical attributes, either strength versus dexterity in popular gaming terminology, but really what it boils down to is sort of power versus precision in your physical abilities of your character. And that philosophical difference is one that players deal with all the time, and you probably have your personal favorites as to what types of characters you like to build and play, although of course we all play both, but certain ones suit games better, different genres, different systems. And, maximizing the effectiveness of a character is part of what makes them fun to play. Not that you have to be the toughest character in a fight or whatever, but you want your character to be all it can be within the context of your character concept. So looking at systems and looking at genres and looking where certain characters fit in that landscape is worthwhile. So from my perspective, each has their charms, but the best systems tend to be those that achieve a certain amount of parity between character concepts, giving players an equal opportunity for effectiveness with either a power or a precision-based character. So let's take a look at some examples and how that fits into some modern gaming systems. So strength-based is pretty straightforward in most systems and in most genres. So I'm going to spend most of my time talking about, the precision style dex-based characters. For obvious reasons, genres that feature more melee combat with swords and clubs and the myriad variations thereof will tend to lean more on strength, whereas more modern genres or even futuristic genres that have more ranged combat weapons will tend to make better use of dexterity-based characters, marksmanship, and so forth. But genre aside, let's look at systems. Those systems which achieve the closest parity, in my experience, tend to be dice pool systems. And a good current example would be something like Shadowrun, 6th World, 6th Edition, whatever you want to call it. This is because whether you're working off of body or agility, which are the Shadowrun terms for the strength and dex attributes, you're assembling a pile of dice from which you roll for as many successes as possible against the defense rating, is what they call it. Think of it kind of like armor class, which is derived from your opponent's stats of various sorts. Without getting too bogged down in the system specifics, it's like most dice pool systems in that additional successes beyond your initial hit add to your damage roll, meaning the more accurate your hit, the more damage you do. This feature makes precision very much a key element in Shadowrun, not only in hitting with most types of attacks, but in maximizing the damage, which was really great for parity. And the size of your attack dice pool also does another thing. It tends to govern the number of attacks you can make. Most dice pool systems, and Shadowrun is an example, let you subdivide that pool into as many attacks as you want within certain limits, which serves the function of speed, right? It gives you more attacks per round, which for a dex-based precision type character, having numerically more attacks will give you kind of make up for the lack of power that you might have for a single really overwhelming attack. A lot depends on how the damage effects are tracked. It can sometimes be advantageous to pepper a target or maybe a group of targets with multiple small dice pool attacks, assuming you have, a pretty sizable attack pool to begin with, probably a weapon that has a healthy base damage so that you do a fair amount of damage with each one of those attacks. and also that the targets have a relatively easy defense rating or to-hit roll, depending on your system, so that with that smaller subdivided attack pool, you can still hit. Another factor in this is armor. Now, in Shadowrun, rather than absorb damage, which is sort of the realistic way that armor works, body armor instead adds to a defender's defense rating, making them harder to hit rather than harder to hurt. This will be familiar to fans of D&D, because that's, increasing armor class makes you harder to hit. That is from my perspective, a blunder that Shadowrun repeats because it's not very realistic. But we'll put that aside for the moment. From the mechanics standpoint, that can discourage multi-attacks against armored targets, but because the initial to-hit roll in Shadowrun is agility-based for most weapons, it makes a high agility that much more essential in scoring a successful hit, whether or not you're doing a single attack or multiple attacks, which again sort of sways the bias towards parity or even maybe a little bit in favor of a dex-based character because of those armor rules. Now, counterintuitive armor rules won't necessarily be a part of every dice pool system you deal with, or at least we hope not, right? But it's always worthwhile to understand how damage is impacted by factors like armor when deciding between a power or precision character concept. Now, as I said before, one of the systems that I wanted to cover here, and one that Justin has talked about a fair bit recently in his recent videos, is, because it's brand new and we're both pretty excited about it, is the new Cyberpunk Red, which is the new edition of the classic Cyberpunk game. Given the genre similarities, you might assume that it would be similar to Shadowrun, but that's definitely not the case, primarily because of the differences in the system rather than, the genre, which is very similar. Like previous iterations of Cyberpunk, Red works on a sort of cumulative linear numerical to hit roll. Again, think D&D. Ranged weapons are still a dex base. We'll call it, in cyberspeak, it's reflex plus marksmanship skill. But the key difference is how the damage is tallied. Ranged weapons in Cyberpunk have a fixed damage roll value that's not increased by your level of success. As such, precision plays basically no role beyond determining the initial hit. Likewise, armor. Armor skims a fixed value off the top of your damage roll, so taking or dealing damage is pretty much a straight numbers game. Also, a character's inherent reflex score plays no part in the number of attacks they get. The speed is not a factor from your reflexes, which seems a little counterintuitive. And incidentally, neither do any of the speed-related cyber enhancements, which are sort of fundamental to a cyberpunk universe, right? Is you can be jacked or wired to the absolute limit, but you still get the exact same number of attacks as the slowest slug in your same character class. That's not great news for fans of speed and precision characters, obviously. To be fair, there's a huge number of special case rules in the new Red core rulebook, and we're just beginning to wrap our heads around the ramifications of those. So full disclosure, there may be rules that are sort of hidden in the back of the book that amp up the importance of reflexes more and add a speed element in the combat system that isn't evident in the initial read through of the rules. So I would say stay tuned for more on the Cyberpunk Red rules in coming videos, both from me and Justin. We'll probably do combo videos of it, so we'll revisit. The last system that I'm going to talk about is the ubiquitous D&D. D&D has always rather infamously combined the traditional attack roll with elements of armor class, rolling the 2 hit and the 2 hurt into a single roll. While talking about the problems with that approach is really a different video, and some people like it, so maybe it's not even a problem for them. I think we can all agree it's no stretch to say that D&D biases the combat system pretty heavily towards the strength attribute, because it uses strength both to resolve the initial 2-hit roll and then again to calculate the actual damage from the hit in most cases. If you're going for a power over a precision character concept, the D&D combat system is tailor-made to you. This is a no-brainer. But if you're going for a dex-based character, you can make an effective one. It just takes a little bit more planning and thought. And to the credit of D&D's creators, they realized pretty early on that their system was slanted very heavily towards strength, and they've written in a few workarounds and band-aids and one-off rules to try and compensate a little bit for this. And we'll talk about those. Because of the world, D&D combat is mostly melee weapons, swords and clubs, and all the extra iterations of those things. Whereas with, ranged weapons like bows and crossbows sprinkled in for flavor, the overwhelming majority are strength-based, although bows and ranged weapons are dex-based. And the rules even shoehorn some dex-based rules back into the melee combat with so-called finesse weapon. Now, some of you are probably familiar with these. For those of you who aren't, those couple of you, just to recap. Finesse weapons let you choose between dex or strength for your to hit and damage roll. So you can, if you're dex-based, you can choose those weapons and use that attribute. Now, why there's even a choice for certain finesse weapons, something like a fencing rapier or a whip, it's bizarre that you could even justify strength with a weapon like that. But you know what? Let's not worry about it. You have a choice, so choose the one that works best for you. Chances are, if you're a strength character, you're not going to be using those weapons anyway. So there's another factor. Again, we talked about speed and extra attacks. That's really important in 5th edition D&D, and well, previous editions too. But like with Cyberpunk, they're not a product of speed, and no amount of dex will get you more action. Rather, actions are purely a product of class and level. And because of that, when you get to 11th level and beyond, even the slowest, clumsiest fighter will still have more combat actions than the fastest, most dexterous monk or ranger or rogue. Go figure. I don't have an explanation for why that would make sense. It's just the way the rules are. But that means if you want to play a character that relies on speed and precision, you're actually probably best served by a dex-based fighter class in most cases. Of course, with D&D, things are seldom as straightforward as that. So you're also going to need to shop around for class traits and feats to optimize your character. You got a bunch of choices there, and you need to make the right ones. And that's going to take some homework. If you're building a fighter, take a look at Battlemaster archetype and its combat maneuver called Precision Attack, which, seems obvious enough. It allows you to add a superiority die to your to-hit roll. Now, I'm not going to get into what superiority dice are, and suffice to say, you get a bonus die that adds to your to-hit roll, making you effectively more accurate. Feats for dex characters are relatively rare, but there are a few. Crossbow Expert is definitely worth a look for reloading speed and a couple other things. Defensive Duelist is good if you're going with a melee combat type character. It's excellent for defense. But I would say, if you're going dex-based, you're probably going to be using bows, ranged weapons, and the key one there is going to be Sharpshooter. Now, for my money, Sharpshooter is worth it for the range and cover bonuses alone. But it also gives you the option to take a -5 penalty to your to-hit roll in exchange for a +10 damage modifier. Now, especially at the low to mid experience levels, this is really, really huge. This means even if you built your character for speed and accuracy, you can selectively switch to a power attack effectively through the use of this feat anytime it's to your advantage to do so. That's definitely one that you want to take a serious look at if you're doing a D&D character that's dex-based, a ranged attack character anyway. So there you have it, 3 systems with some similarities but also some significant differences, and some of the aspects that affect building a strength versus a precision based character. And these principles will apply across all kinds of genres and gaming systems. So it's always worthwhile to look at the accuracy, how easy it is to hit, what you're using, what stat you're using to hit with, how many attacks you can do, what kind of armor or defense your targets have, and sort of tweak your character to accommodate those within the given system. You don't have to be the most effective in combat in order to have fun playing a character. That's not what role-playing is about. But, for most of us, if your character has combat ability, you want it to be as effective as it can be so you can play your part and you're not overshadowed in that element of the game. So hopefully, these pointers make sense to you guys, and I'm sure lots of you have considered them at least piecemeal when you're making your characters, but I think, approaching them sort of holistically will help you develop a character that works well, and maybe help less experienced gamers to be thinking about these aspects as they're creating a character, so that they too can have a more full and enjoyable gaming experience. So yeah, that's my last probably video of the year, since we're quickly approaching the holidays. Justin and I will be doing another dynamic duo episode before too long here, if we can get some time over the holidays to get together and film one. And as always, both he and I really appreciate you guys watching, tuning in, giving us constructive feedback, comments, questions, requests, or just sharing your thoughts about the topics that we talk about. Maybe you guys have given, I'm sure many of you have given these same concepts I'm talking about some serious thought, so feel free to share yours in the comments below. Until next time, guys, probably in the new year, game on.